Welcome to Life Cycle Talks, a series of talks presenting the research front to keep you up to date with the science and application of the life cycle perspective. Today's life cycle talk is how can social life cycle assessment address social sustainability? We will increase our knowledge and understanding of the research field of social LCA and take part of results on how to define the human well-being that social LCA aims to support. My name is Anna Wikström, and I'm happy to welcome our guest for today, Mathias Lindkvist, postdoctoral researcher at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. Warm welcome, Mathias.
Thank you.
And before we start, I just want to inform about some practical information. All Life Cycle talks will be published and available on the Swedish Life Cycle Center YouTube channel, and the raise hand function will not be used in Life Cycle talks. Back to you, Mathias. I'm curious, what prompted you start studying this research field?
Yes, so I would say it was a combination of two things. So first, social LCA has been presented as a potential important complement to environmental LCA in order to do more holistic sustainability life cycle assessment. But there seem to be rather some remaining methodological challenges.
Thank you. Now, please, it's time for your life cycle talk.
Thank you. Yes, so I will today talk about how can social LCA address social sustainability. And the first part will focus a bit generally on social LCA, and the second part will be on our ongoing research on the relationship between social LCA and social sustainability. So to begin, what is social LCA? Some of you might already be familiar with it. It's a tool for assessing the social impacts being effects from product life cycles, from the processes along these life cycles. And these social impacts can be impacts on, for example, health, belonging, freedom, but also other aspects. And here in the figure is a simplified image about the system that is considered. So the product life cycle to the left and the social impacts being effects of it to the right and being impacted by it. So how long has this been going on? Well, the development of social LCA has been going on since at least 2006, so a bit more than 15 years at least. And why social LCA? Yes, so there are rather some issues, or can be, in the product life cycles, like child labor or slave labor. And the reason for developing and using social LCA is also to complement, as mentioned, environmental LCA. And for what can then social LCA more practically be used? Well, two main useful areas could be to identify potential problems and hopefully to handle them in a good way, and for communication about social sustainability. And how much is then social LCA used? Well, this is a bit difficult to know. Research is to rather some degree carried out on social LCA, but how much social LCA is actually used in, for example, businesses for decisions and communication is not so easy to find out from current research or information. What is sort of the state of social LCA? What resources are there? Important core resources are the guidelines on social LCA, the latest version from 2020, and its twin document, the methodological sheets from 2021. Both of these published through UNEP. And these are the second editions of these documents. The first guidelines were published in 2009. These guidelines from 2020, they can both be seen as giving guidance on how to do social LCA, but also being a kind of summary of the research up until then, the core research on social LCA. And in addition, there is an ISO standard under development on social LCA. And as of October 2022, it's in a preparatory state, continuing. And also regarding resources, there are two commercial databases called PSILCA and Social Hotspot Database, specifically on social LCA and compatible with standard softwares for environmental LCA. So there are a bit of resources already. So some characteristics of social LCA. According to the research, you can say that there are two main ways to do social LCA. Either the so-called reference scale, RS approach, or the so-called impact pathway, IP approach. And the figure here very schematically compares them. So the reference scale approach is that you look at what is a bit obvious problematic activities and performances throughout the life cycle and assess them directly. While in the impact pathway approach, you try to find all relevant performances or activities along the life cycle and then trace through cause-effect relationships how these finally impact social impacts. There's a bit of difference between these two methods. So the reference scale method is close to the life cycle, can be rather comparably easy to perform and is established. There has been developed 40 so-called subcategories to show different important areas in it. And this will be more on next slide. And the assessment itself is often presented in scales ranging from, for example, +2 to -2, where 0 is neutral to some benchmark, and +2 is rather much better, and -2 rather much worse. In comparison, then the impact pathway approach can be used to avoid a kind of sub-optimization that could occur from the reference scale approach, because not all activities that actually have an impact on final social impacts are looked at. But the downside is that this impact pathway approach is only little developed as of now. So to say a little more then about the rather established reference scale approach in social LCA, there are the 40 mentioned subcategories. And these are grouped in 6 different stakeholder groups. And I will mention the groups and how many subcategories in each of them to give you a bit of an image of what it is, and then give some examples. So in the group workers, there are 11 subcategories. In the group local community, there are 9. In the group value chain actors, but excluding consumers, there are 5. For consumers, there are 5. For society, so more broadly than local community, there are 7. And for children, there are 3. And some examples here just to give you a bit of flavor what this is. So in the worker category, we have one subcategory that is forced labor. So like slave contracts, slave conditions. For local community, we have, among other, cultural heritage as one subcategory. For value chain actors, we have wealth distribution. So this is how value added is distributed between different organizations along a product life cycle. And for society, one of the subcategories is technology development. So how well technology development is performed and made available. And now to turn to our research on the connection between social LCA and social sustainability. So this research is how to identify these impact pathways that there has not been so much research on yet. So the research is performed by Elisabeth Ekener and myself, both at KTH Royal Institute of Technology. And the project title is Let's Do It, Moving Forward in the Methodological Development of Social Life Cycle Assessment in Some Challenging Areas. And this is funded by the Swedish Research Council FORMAS, a project of about 2 million Swedish crowns and running between 2019 to 2022, so soon ending. And here we have 3 main parts in this project. The first is where should these impact pathways end? What is it really that we want to aim at supporting with social LCA? And here we focus on human well-being. And then we have also carried out a literature study about the literature on creating impact pathways. What literature is there already? And finally, we are carrying out a comparison of these so-called subcategories in this reference scale approach to impact pathways and especially to human well-being. So the part on where impact pathways should end, I will say a few words about here. So the focus then is on human well-being. And turning to the literature in philosophy, we see 3 main ways of defining human well-being. The first is about desires, human desires. So what really happens when we make our decisions consciously or not consciously. And this can be useful because it is what we actually base our decisions on, but these decisions can often be based on incomplete information. So it's not necessarily that they lead in the end to supporting human well-being. Then a second definition is so-called objectively good items. And these are items that have been found to generally be very important for humans and sort of an integral part of well-being. And there are lists of them typically. And this helps to produce some clarity. There is a certain list, not too long. But what one can question is how to actually define a good life here. And how might this be biased by Western science and scholarship and maybe not applicable to the whole world? And finally, a third way to define human well-being, pleasure and displeasure, what we finally experience. So this can be useful because it is actually final human well-being, but can be vague and can also be difficult to connect to how we actually make decisions. And focusing on the middle one here, we have, by synthesizing the vast literature on this, found 5 objectively good items based on sustainability science, philosophy, psychology, and development studies. And these are shown here in the figure. And this is for one person: having a healthy life, achieving abilities, having influence and freedom, sense of meaning and belonging, and enjoying fair treatment. So this is a synthesis of all this literature, and hopefully can help at least as a guide for what not to omit in social LCA. We have also been looking at some other parts regarding the relationship between social LCA and social sustainability. And the first part is on already existing literature about creating these impact pathways. And from this literature, we see that there is considerable interest, but only 5 found impact pathways so far, and they mostly focus on health, when these 5 items that we found focused on a more broad range of social sustainability. And we also have identified that social, looking at what final impact social impacts can, and this is supported by the literature, go via environmental impact. So not only that social effects lead to social effects, but many different pathways. And the second part we have looked at is this comparison between the so-called subcategories in the reference scale approach to social LCA and their relation to impact pathways. And we see that there is a considerable relation between the subcategories to these good items that we identified and showed in the previous previous slide. And we also have identified that there might be room for some clarifications of and complements to the subcategories in the rather established reference scale approach to social LCA. And to conclude, so we see rather some interest in social LCA, but the methodology is rather challenging to develop. And this should be said in the light of that social LCA has been under development since 2006 at least. We identified that this not so developed impact pathway approach to social LCA ought not to focus too much only on health, which has much been the focus so far. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mathias, for your presentation. Now I have some questions for you. And the first question is, your research within social LCA, why is it important and for whom is it important?
Yes, so first of all, it is a rather theoretical or deep into the methodology. When we perform it, the final aim is absolutely to support social sustainability in society and different organizations that work with it and that consider working with social LCA. And maybe what they will do from our research is not obvious. Maybe it's up to them to choose, but we want to provide a thorough knowledge base where they can both see the opportunities of social LCA, but also the limitations, to know when could it be useful, when could maybe some other approach be useful, and in the end to support social sustainability and the work with it.
Great, thank you. And what do you think about the potential for social LCA regarding social sustainability from an industry perspective?
Yes, so first of all, that feels like it's very difficult to assess. We see rather some interest also from a previous study I was involved in on the use of social LCA in Sweden, but some reluctance this far to work more thoroughly with it. And maybe it's like there will be a sudden effect and suddenly it will be used a lot, but there has been challenging, like it being difficult to get into the methodology to understand it, difficult to get data, especially if you trace suppliers further down or upstream the supply chain. But work in general in industry seems to be going towards looking at larger parts of the supply chain. So there is some developments that are compatible with social LCA, but it feels like it's difficult to say right now.
Okay. And we have several people from industry listening today. And if someone in the audience feels inspired and would like to carry out a study, do you have any guidance on where to start?
Yes, so I would then still say that this UNEP published guidelines from 2020, it is a document, not very short, but there are some summary parts and so, and to just get an overview of what's there, because there are other guidelines to social LCA also, but this is really like a summary of the research up until then, and since it's relatively recently and not so much has happened since then, that could give a first idea of the potential usefulness for this organization.
Great, thank you. And there is a great interest in this methodology. Why do you or your research team think that is?
So I would guess that one big reason could be, in general, as we have these challenges in supply chains with like child labor and slave labor, but also the connection when talking about sustainability transitions, for example, electrification with batteries, and so there have been news about potential issues in the supply chain regarding social sustainability, so that we don't, when we aim for environmental sustainability, miss or create other problems regarding social sustainability. I don't know if I have seen explicitly this being said, but one could think that this can be clearly a driver for the interest.
Great, thank you. And what research is needed for social LCA to reach the same impact as environmental LCA have had? So what research
Yes.
is needed?
Yes. So first the question is if social LCA can ever have that large impact. Maybe it can, a bit tricky to know. But as I showed for these so-called impact pathways, so really tracing cause-effect relationships, there is very little research this far, even if it started a bit back in time. While environmental LCA is based on rather established natural science relationships, although there are also challenges. To make a social LCA more robust, more scientifically rigorous, there seems to be rather some need to look more at these impact pathways. So still then a bit into the future.
Thank you. And you have several years of research experience in social LCA. What has been your biggest aha experience?
Yeah. So I think it was when I really went into looking into this type of a social LCA called impact pathway approach and saw how little had been done there, although you can trace social LCA back to 2006 and see that there is this strong relationship to environmental LCA where there are really where you use cause-effect relationships. So that was an aha moment, I would say, to see that.
Thank you for sharing. And If you were to choose completely freely, which industry would be the most interesting to dive into and do a social LCA with, and why?
Yes. So then I will say something about the industries I haven't already been really looking into. And then I'm thinking of something with rather complex products, like regarding mobility or IT-related products or services, where there can be many different components from all over the world, and even maybe a challenge just to have an overview of them for other purposes in the companies, and things can be changing suppliers and with what type of products are produced. So how to handle such a situation would be interesting and hopefully rewarding to look at.
Great, thank you. And could you give examples of social LCA studies that has led to a change, to an improvement?
Well, so in a way, I would say that all of the social LCA studies that have been done have increased the knowledge base in this challenging and already evolving field. What then it could lead in practice to regarding social sustainability is maybe more difficult to say. And I don't know any obvious example that really where the results were really used to make a change or to keep something that really had an effect. So maybe that such studies are not apparently very well known. That says something about the challenges with this methodology still.
Okay, yes. And the last question, what knowledge do you want the listeners to take with them now from this presentation?
Yes. So I hope they feel inspired by thinking and looking more at social sustainability, and also throughout supply chains, so not only in their own organizations, and that these challenges, it's if we can come up with good ways to deal with it, that can really be a valuable contribution, but that it might take some time and effort, so that we don't give up too early. I guess that's what I
Sounds
would like
good.
to say.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mathias Lindkvist, postdoctoral researcher at KTH Royal Institute of Technology. And if you are interested to learn more about the field of social LCA, you will find more information in UNEP's guidelines, as Mathias mentioned, on social LCA. And we have also selected 2 publications here from Mathias. It's Towards Social Sustainability, Effective Supply Chains of Innovative and Established Products, Defining the Human Well-being to Support, and Insights on Social LCA in Practice in Sweden. And all these links are available in the calendar post for the event at lifecyclecenter.se. And please feel free to contact Mathias for questions. And here you can see his email address. And the Life Cycle Talks are published by the Innovation Cluster for the Life Cycle Perspective and the Swedish Life Cycle Center. And next talk will be given on December 14 on life cycle assessment of emerging technologies with Matti Jensen. And to ensure you don't miss this, follow us at LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletters. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you again, Mathias.